Hello, I'm Debra Valencia. In this video, I'm going to show you how to prepare your Katazome stencils for the box project. First, I'm going to show you a few stencil Katazome projects, Indigo projects that I did in previous workshops. So these are not for the box project, but it'll just show you some of the possibilities for your stencil design. Now, I'll show you a close-up of these in just a few minutes, but just to give you an overview, this piece here was printed with an antique Japanese stencil. So this was, it's very, very, very fine and very detailed. This is much more detailed than most of us will be able to accomplish. It takes great skill to cut out these tiny little details. But just to give you an idea that the elements can be very small. This piece here was also printed with antique stencils that we had access to in previous workshops. So this one's a classic chrysanthemum flower that you probably recognize from Japanese woodblock printing. It's beautiful. And so you can see there's actually very, very fine lines in here. And then here is a simpler but just as equally beautiful little floral design. And if you look, when you see the close-up view, you'll see that the line work has little bridges that hold the inner parts of the stencil together. And then here's an overall texture, which I love as well. And it's almost like a little coffee bean shape. There are some wonderful Japanese geometric prints that would be good to look at. But this, in theory, this would actually match up and register. So a kimono maker could make a 30 meter piece of fabric and have it all continuous. So it shows you the great detail that's part of this technique. Now here, this last piece up here, these are two stencils that I personally cut myself. So one's a ginkgo leaf, one's an abstract flower. And so you can see they're much bolder than the antique stencils. And also I'm going to show you how with actually a leather punching tool, I was able to get these little tiny circles. Because these would be very difficult to cut out with an X-Acto knife, but it works great to use some alternate tools. And then just to show you how this stencil looked on linen, here's on some beautiful linen, antique linen. And this is a stencil that I cut myself in one of the previous workshops. So it's an abstract, simplified floral design. And here's another one that I did. And you can see I also used the leather punching tool to make these tiny little dots. So don't rule out the idea of getting some detail in there. And if you want to just go simpler and bolder, because you can't really, you can't cut such fine detail, it's fine to just do something simple and bold. This still looks really wonderful. And I'm going to show you how I actually took this stencil design that I designed last year and I've configured it to work with the box project. Just some other examples of that fabric, of my stencils on different fabric. This is on an ivory burlap or canvas, and then also on a brighter white. So even the indigo comes out differently. So for the upcoming workshop, we are actually making a box project. So you should have received a large piece of the Katazome stencil paper. This is made out of persimmon. It's very expensive, so I'm going to show you how I lay mine out, because it's very important that you take time to really consider your design and also carefully cut your design out, because if you make mistakes, and a certain number of them could certainly be patched, and we can deal with that when the time comes. But if you have dozens and dozens of mistakes, it could possibly weaken the integrity of the stencil and make it difficult to print. So and we're going to be spending quite a bit of time on this project. We're going to spend an entire day printing the stencils on fabric, and then probably at least one entire additional day making the box. So you really want this to be a masterpiece. I would take great time in considering what your design is and draw it up several times on paper, tracing over it, and making sure all the bridges are correct. So I'll show you with the mock-up how I did this, but basically you've got a front cover, a spine, a back cover, a spine, and an inside cover. And then you have these two flaps that look basically like a jeans pocket. Those are going to attach and match up to the back cover, top and bottom. So those are all the pieces that are going to get printed and covered with some kind of design. Now, you'll want to make sure that you have a cutting mat. I have several large cutting mats that I use for both cutting paper and as well as if I'm doing sewing and quilting and things like that. You don't want to cut directly on a table. You can cut directly on chipboard, but it does tend to dull your knife blades more quickly. So this is a really good investment. You could get a smaller one and just cut the designs in each panel. That's not a big deal, but these are really handy and definitely a nice metal cutting edge and measuring device. So what I've done is I actually had I had drawn my designs and I drew my designs by hand and then I scanned them into the computer. So I already had them basically as vector files, so that's not important. You can certainly draw this all by hand. It's not essential at all to have them on the computer. I just happen to have mine on the computer, so I laid it out to match up with the I laid it out to match up with the okay, scratch all that. In this first design sample, I'm going to show you, I happen to already have these designs in the computer because it's an existing motif that I designed. It's actually been reproduced already on Fabric by the Yard for the sewing consumer and also on bedding designs. And I thought, well, it already has a nice stencil effect. It's going to need some modifications, but I thought that would be a nice place to start. So I laid it out in rectangles that match up with the box stencil. And so let me just take a second to match these up. I think this goes on. All right, here we go. Okay, so it goes like that. Like that. I think I have multiple copies. Okay, so basically I have my front cover, my back cover, my inside cover, and then I have my top and bottom flap, which go like this. So just to save time, I've actually already, so what I did is cut out each rectangle, and I put it together into a mock-up. And so this is just a quick and dirty, you know, cut it out with scissors, fold it by eye type of thing. I'm just going to put some books in here to give it a little substance and just explain how that looks. So, as someone who's reading the book or opening the box, it's facing me correctly, but the Japanese box, three-part box, will open left to right. So we're going to have it will have some type of a closure on this side. So just keep in mind it's left to right. So this is the top cover, spine, and then the two top and bottom spines. Now you'll notice that the top and bottom spines are not as deep as the sides, and that's because that's not a mistake. It's because due to the thickness of the cardboard that will become the box, that's all been taken into consideration. So it would be very difficult to have a design that wraps around and matches up perfectly this way because there's going to be a difference in the height. So what I did with my design is I created more of a centered motif, and that way it will look nice from an angle, but I don't have to worry about any kind of mismatching of the corners. So as the person opens the book, I open it and then I get the nice surprise of the inside cover. So instead of doing just one continuous design, which might be sort of boring from a design standpoint, I actually took my same flowers and leaves and I created a corner motif. Now you could do a center design, you could do a border, you can certainly do a continuous design, but I think it's really nice to think about the front cover, back cover, spines, and the inside cover as each a separate surface because they're at different angles. And then as you open it, then again you have the surprise of whatever the next reveal of the inside books. So I decided to take two leaves and alternate the orientation. So these will then fold out that way, and inside we'll have several handmade books that I'm going to make in Japan. So that's one option, and this shows you the back design. And then as an alternate, I did something a little more modern looking and a geometric, and this would be much, much easier to cut out. So again, take into consideration a very, very simple design could be equally as beautiful. So again, I have the front cover. In this one, I've decided to make the design wrap around because it just perfectly fit on the spine. And then on the reveal, I decided to give it some white space and then just create one vertical stripe with my sort of tribal geometric here. Now, you're going to cut out the black area and then leave the white. The white area will become the solid part of the Katazome paper. When we print it, we're going to be actually printing rice paste resist through the open areas, and that will protect the fabric from dye. We'll dye the fabric, which means that and then we wash the paste off. So what happens is that the final result will be indigo blue, dark, and everything that you see black here will become white, or the color of the fabric. So here the design just lent itself to wrapping around. But again, I've given a little bit of visual relief here with this stripe. So there's all kinds of ways that you could go with your design. If you're an illustrator, you could create a scene. If you like to design mandalas, it could be a centered type design. Or, if you're a surface designer, you like repeat patterns, it could be overall like that. Basically, you can have a different design on every single surface. But think about, I would definitely lay it out this way, because even when I was doing my rose design on the computer, I actually had this upside down, and I didn't realize it until I made the prototype. So that way you can make any corrections to what you're doing. Now, I'm also going to show you, if you're working by hand, and even with the computer drawing, it's not perfectly set up for stencils at this point. What I've done is I've traced over my rose motif on tracing paper, because actually the tracing paper will be a little easier to cut out when it's glued to the Katazome stencil paper. The bond, I've worked with the bond as well, but it's a little tiny bit thick. The stencil paper is definitely, the tracing paper is definitely more pleasant to cut out, and especially if you have a very intricate design. So basically I've colored this in with my Sharpie. Okay, so I'm going to show you now an up close view of my stencil art, and this looks pretty good as far as the petals of the rose, the inner petals of the rose, and the little black dots. This is all going to work as a stencil. It has adequate white spaces that create the bridges or channels or connectors that we call it in stencils. But when I get to this decorative leaf design, actually this inside white piece does not have connectors to the outside white. So this is going to need some corrections. What I like to do is, if I haven't drawn it correctly from the get-go, is to simply go back and make some corrections to it. And I would say it's completely normal to do at least 2 or 3 or 4 passes at this before it's considered done. But I like to take just typical office whiteout, and just need to put my glasses on. Okay, so I'm going to take just office white out here, and I'm just going to use this to create some little white channels. So if you think about like stencil alphabets, they always have little connectors that go to the inside of the A and the B and all that. And they can look ugly, I think. They can look ugly, but they don't have to. You can just try to make them gracefully work. Like I'm making these lines slightly curved so that they look like they're part of the leaf design. So that's going to work right there. I actually disconnected the stem of the leaf by adding a little white there, because that will just look a little more like all the pieces are intentionally stencilized. And so that's going to work perfectly right there. I just had to make that little tiny modification. Now you should have received this Olfa knife, which came with your homework kit. This is what they typically use in Japan. And so there are 25 blades in there. That should probably be enough to cover you for one big stencil design. You definitely want to keep your blade very sharp, and don't be afraid to throw them out. Personally, though, I'm very attached to the number 11 X-Acto blade. So I'm going to go ahead and use the number 11 for mine. I'm used to using that. I've been using these for decades, and I love them. So what I'm going to do is, now I have my tracing paper. Now, if this was really messy, if I had done a lot of corrections and rework and redrawing on this, I wouldn't hesitate to put it under this tracing paper and make a fresh new drawing of it, because you don't want to, if your drawing is very messy, your guidelines for cutting, you're gonna be very apt to make mistakes on your stencil cutting. So I'm going to get my stencil here. Okay, so here actually, so I'm going to just verify which way I want my stencil to go. So I think what happened was I had my inside cover art on this far left panel, but it actually should be here on this far right, and I actually want it to flip this way. I want my art to actually be in this outer corner, so I'm going to reverse my artwork. So what you're going to do is, whether you're working with the bond or with the tracing paper, you're going to want to actually glue this temporarily to your stencil paper. So I suggest, so that the alignment is really nice, I'm going to cut mine out to the size of the rectangle. Again, I'm going to have a huge amount of time invested in this project, so I want to be very careful about how I am preparing for it. So I'm going to cut out this design. And clear my work area here. And I'm going to make sure this fits and aligns nicely. Okay. And then actually I'm going to just temporarily tack it down with a piece of tape, just a tiny little piece of tape, so it doesn't shift on me. It's not as critical with this floral design, but if I were doing my geometric design, it would be very critical to have the alignment. Otherwise it could be going at a diagonal. The other thing I like to use is just a basic glue stick. This is just like the basic glue stick that you get at the drugstore or whatever. And the reason I like to use glue stick is because I want to be able to remove this paper after I cut it out. We do not want to be printing our rice paste with paper still adhered to the stencil paper, because otherwise it will most likely start coming off when the stencil gets wet, and then it could possibly plug up parts of your design and just make a big mess. So we definitely want something that will hold this down but will be removable. So I'm going to just go ahead and give this a good smearing. And I actually just need to get the designed area in this case, since it's not an overall design. I'm just going to give it a good batch of the glue stick, and I'm going to just rub that down with my hands. You could use a squeegee or some kind of hard object, especially if your design's very intricate. This design's pretty open. So I'm going to just start cutting my design. Now you can see I can't see my channels very well, but I have a pretty good idea of what I want to do here. So just be very careful because you can slip. Now, it's going to take several passes for me to get this out. You don't want to cut too hard because then you're going to have like bumpy. Oh, see, that came out pretty well with just one cut. I'm just going to get a couple corners. Okay, so yeah, that was pretty easy because the tracing paper's thin. It has a few little hairs. I'm going to try to get those out. You can come back and get those later. See, that's not a really pretty curve. I'd like that to be a little nicer. Okay, so this gives you the idea. I also want to show you, I have a set of leather punching tools. And this is what I want to use to actually do my little dots. I'm going to find let's see, what is the biggest one I have? This is what I used to do the stencil last year, which had the little tiny holes in it. So I'm going to choose one of these. These look about the same. I'm going to go with this one. And I just have a little hammer, and I'm going to just place this. It's not quite as big as I'd like it to be, but it's better than having to cut it. Just give it one or two little punches, and then I've got, I think that's going to need a second hit. Look at that. See, I've got beautiful little holes there. And those will print beautifully with the rice paste. But if I had cut them out, they would be rough. They wouldn't be perfect circles. So that's a good way to get little dots and other elements in your design. Okay, so I have finished cutting out my stencil, and now what I want to do is very carefully remove all of the paper. The bridges are very, very delicate, so just be very careful when you're pulling it off. See, I actually have almost a tear there, but not to worry, because we will be adhering this to an actual screen netting type material. That is designed to, that is used to give the stencil strength, because in theory you could use these stencils dozens if not hundreds of times, and the mesh keeps all the little tiny pieces intact so that when you run over it with a big squeegee and your rice paste, you're going to be rubbing against it and you can very easily pull up the little pieces in the corners and so on. So we see that one just tore. So just be very, very careful. I'm going to use the tip of my X-Acto knife to get up part of this. Some of the white out just showed on there. That's not going to matter. I mean, you can draw directly on this, but I really, really warn against it, because if you get messy with your drawing and kind of make corrections and things like that, it's going to be so easy to cut out the wrong part, and you're going to end up spending a lot of time repairing your stencil or doing it over again. So I think it's worth putting it on paper, getting the glue stick, and then going through this little process here. Now, if some little bits are on there, it's not going to be the end of the world. They might just come off once it's in water. Okay, so I'm going to just look at this a little more closely. Flip it to the other side so I can really see. Some of my curves are not as nice as I would like. I'm going to go back in with an extra sharp blade, and I am going to just clean it up a little tiny bit. It's better that it looks good to the eye than follows my original drawing perfectly. So, something like that. And of course, just turn the paper to wherever it's the best angle for you to cut. So see how I'm going to just kind of make those curves a little graceful. This has a little jaggedy edge there. So I'm going to try to get rid of that. So there you go. So I'm going to just proceed with the rest of the stencil now. Now that we're in close-up mode, I'm just going to revisit a few of the stencil printed pieces that I've done in previous workshops. So again, this is not my original stencil design. This is an actual Japanese antique stencil, but you can see how delicate and small the detail is. Here, these are as well, except for this one on the end. These three designs are also made from antique stencils. So now that you can see it up close, you can see in order to create this outline of the flower petal, it has tiny little bridges right here. So those are absolutely essential. So the thing is that even in the leaves, you can see this is not a continuous line. It has little breaks at each point. So even though this may not be the way that you originally designed it, you need that for structure. But it just becomes part of the overall look of the stencil. It still looks beautiful. These little petals have breaks in them. And if you're not really sure, I suggest that you actually cut out a test on your just tracing paper or bond paper to make sure everything's holding together into one big piece before you attempt cutting out the stencil paper. And just a couple quick things. Here is my ginkgo leaf, so you can see each white piece is individual, so there's plenty of structure there to hold it all together. In my little abstract flower, it's bold, but it has some detail, and then I use the leather punching tool to get the little dots. Here is the other abstract floral, and again I use the leather punching tool to create all these little dots, which makes a nice textural design. And then just another one of my floral designs. So that is it for the box project. If you could please prepare your designs, glue it down, or at least test it on paper or part of it. Make sure all the bridges are holding the inner pieces together, and then glue it and cut it. And good luck with that. I will see you in the next video.